particularly Wellington and the South Island, that yes, nationally the margin has gone up over the last 5 years, but it's gone up almost double that of the rest of the North Island in Wellington and the South Island. And there's the report's inconclusive, but they've got no significant data that says there's a reason for that.
Okay. Does competition make a difference? Is lack of competition the problem here, Paul?
I think that's a very fair point. I mean, on the face of it, we've got a number of major fuel retailers, Z, Caltex, BP and Mobil and Gull are the ones that spring to mind. But when you look into that more deeply, and the report's got a fantastic market structure on one of the pages that essentially says it's Gull and all the others, because of the way that all the others, the three majors, Z having bought Chevron and Caltex, the three majors essentially, without the report saying it, the three work together quite closely, at the exclusion of someone like Gull, who then has to operate their own terminals, their own distribution network, and can only compete in certain areas.
Okay, so there's going to be a reporting back to the government in November. You're saying there's a lot in the report which isn't said. We were talking, I think, back in about 2015, when Simon Bridges put the big petrol retailers on notice after they maintained large margins while the price of oil was falling sharply. We seem to talk about this just about every year and have done for the last decade or more. A version of.
I agree. It's a constant, isn't it? And one of the things with this is that, and this report's relied on the major fuel companies collaborating with the report and supplying information. And the reason they state for not being able to give more definitive answers is because a lot of the information they got wasn't in the same sort of format from each company, and a lot of it arrived too late to be included. So one of their major recommendations is that we need to do more studies, and it does seem to be a perpetual cycle. Whereas you talk to most consumers and everybody will point to, well, it's cheaper where there's a Gull, so isn't that becoming quite obvious? And you know, again, we're one step closer to almost confirming that, but without actually confirming it.
Thank you, Paul. Paul Smith joining us on that. You can never have too many studies. Before we go, I just want to ask you about this lovely story, marvellous story, New Jersey Governor Chris Christie. A budget impasse in New Jersey led to the closure of all sorts of parks and recreational areas, 35,000 workers laid off. The governor's residence in one of those areas, absolute beachfront in the Island Beach State Park. So the governor, although the park was closed, was able to have it to himself with his family and aides. Unfortunately, a news plane was flying above to show television viewers a shot of the deserted coastline and saw the governor in a deck chair. I just want to ask you one thing. If you were Chris Christie, would you have felt entitled to go to the beach?
If I were Chris Christie, yes, I would. But that's because he is an entitled oaf.
Jenny?
There's not much more you can say than that, except for that great expression, only in America.
Only in America. On their National Day. Jenny Morton, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Jim.
And Steve McCabe, nice to see you back, and thanks for your company.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your company, everybody. We're back tomorrow as per usual, and Checkpoint with John Campbell coming up.
Kia ora everyone. Tonight, the owners of 34 properties in a Bay of Plenty beachside settlement may be forced to abandon their homes due to extreme flooding and debris, an event that occurred 12 years ago. So why were they able to rebuild at the time, and why may they be compelled to go now? What has been taking place over the past 12 years? This is a Checkpoint investigation. Plus, the government offers $25 million in funding and loans towards restoring the Christchurch Cathedral. A damning government report shows people in Wellington and the South Island are paying an extra 15 cents a litre for petrol, some of it government tax, of course. Venus Williams and that media conference, and Ben Hawke, the 12-year-old weather forecaster from Mosgiel.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Good evening, I'm Anna Thomas. The country's biggest independent petrol company is backing a report which says the cost of petrol is probably too high. The government-commissioned report says Wellingtonians and South Islanders in particular may be paying too much for petrol. The general manager of Gull, Dave Bodger, says his company can only store petrol at its site near the port of Tauranga, which means it can't sell south of Levin. But he says prices would come down if independent companies were allowed access to a port in the South Island, such as Lyttelton or Timaru.
We can't get fuel into the South Island or effectively into Wellington to open sites. But if there was open terminal access, then potentially we could, us and others, bring greater competition.
Dave Bodger from Gull. Z Energy insists the petrol market is competitive and that its economic returns are reasonable and in line with domestic and international peers. The Whakatane District Council has announced that the loss of life risk in Matata in the Bay of Plenty due to flooding and debris is so high 34 properties need to be abandoned. The council wants the regional council to make a planned change so it can acquire the properties identified as being high risk. Properties in Matata were badly damaged in May 2005 when intense rain forced water and debris into the community. The Bay of Plenty Regional Council says it's yet to actually receive a formal request. Locals say they stayed after 2005 because they were told the risk would be mitigated and cannot believe they're being asked to leave now. The Building and Construction Minister has been challenged on his statement that housing affordability is in the eye of the beholder. Nick Smith was responding to questions about why the government and the Auckland Council can't say how many affordable homes have been built in special housing areas. Dr Smith told Parliament he stands by his statement.
It is absolutely true that what is an affordable house does vary depending on a person's circumstances.
The Building and Construction Minister Nick Smith, the Auckland Council set up more than 150 special housing areas with the government in order to fast-track the building of tens of thousands of new homes. Under the deal, at least 10% of large developments have to have cheaper homes for first home buyers on modest incomes. The United States military says North Korea launched a single land-based intermediate-range ballistic missile today that was tracked for 37 minutes before it landed in the Sea of Japan. It said the missile was fired from near North Korea's Panghyon airfield. The launch is the 11th since the start of the year. It came just hours after China's ambassador to the United Nations warned of disastrous consequences if world powers failed to find a way to ease tensions with North Korea that risked getting out of control. The emergency services believe the explosion which ripped apart a house in Auckland this morning was caused by a gas leak. The emergency services were called out to Mary Drever Street in New Windsor after reports of a massive blast at about 6 o'clock. The senior station officer at Avondale, Chris Power, says the two people who were in the house reported smelling gas about 2 hours earlier. He says it's rare to see an explosion of this magnitude. A man and a woman are still recovering at Middlemore Hospital after one received moderate and the other serious injuries. A property trustee for Christchurch's quake-damaged cathedral says a new government offer to help fund the building's restoration is generous. The future of the badly damaged building has been argued for the past 6 years. The Anglican Church favours a new building, while some heritage advocates want the cathedral restored. Maya Burry reports.
The government is offering $25 million in funding and loans to reinstate the cathedral, bringing the estimated available funds to $90 million. That figure includes a $14 million pledge from the Great Christchurch Buildings Trust and a $10 million grant from the Christchurch City Council, which is subject to consultation. Church property trustee Corin Murfitt says the offer is an improvement on previous ones put forward by the government. Dr Murfitt says the offer will be seriously considered when there is a vote on the building's fate at a meeting of the Church Synod in September. This is Maya Burry.
It's 5:04. Netball New Zealand is playing down the impact Laura Langman's decision to again turn her back on the Silver Ferns may have on other players heading overseas. Langman's decision to play for the Sunshine Coast Lightning in the domestic Australian competition made her ineligible for the Silver Ferns this year. The 141 Test veteran has today re-signed with Lightning for the next year, ruling her out of April's Commonwealth Games. The acting chief executive of Netball New Zealand, David Cooper, says they're currently signing players on for the 2018 season.
Other players will make their decisions based on the position that they're in at the time, and Laura certainly understood the decision that she was making. So our position is around protection of our system and making sure that our system's as good as it can be for the Silver Ferns to be the best team that they can possibly be.
David Cooper. The All Blacks aren't wasting time pondering the seeming inconsistency of the judiciary process in the aftermath of the second Test loss to the British and Irish Lions. Sonny Bill Williams was sent off and suspended for 4 weeks for a shoulder charge, but Lions loose forward Sean O'Brien escaped punishment for an alleged swinging arm tackle. All Blacks assistant coach Ian Foster accepts the process will always be contentious.
It's an awkward area, we all know that, and it's a hard area to get right. It gets a motive, everyone's got opinions. We know it's a tough area to get perfect, and we've always said that we just go through the process and stand by the decisions, and we've copped the punishment for it, and we'll move on.
All Blacks assistant coach Ian Foster. And that's the news.
A hot housing market.
The government's position always was that trying to regulate house price was always going to not succeed.
A house on fire.
3 of the walls have been totally demolished and one of the walls was just blown completely out.
A politician in hot water at the beach.
I didn't get any sun today. There's no one at Island Beach State Park. Next. Excuse me, next.
Turning up the temperature. Morning Report with Susie Ferguson and Guy and Espinner, weekdays from 6.
Then on 9 to noon, the interactive online STEM subject boost for NCEA students. And after 10, using Aboriginal culture to create a searing social commentary in a post-apocalyptic Australia. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
And now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Wednesday. Northland to Waikato, also the Coromandel. Cloudy periods and a few showers, especially tomorrow. Bay of Plenty, Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, mainly fine weather. Waitomo to Wellington, including the central high country and Wairarapa, fine apart from isolated showers. Marlborough and Nelson, fine with morning frosts or fog. For Buller and Westland, a few showers north of Hokitika, clearing overnight. Otherwise fine with areas of frost or fog tomorrow morning. For Canterbury, fine with morning frosts, showers about Banks Peninsula and 1 or 2 spreading inland tomorrow evening. Otago, Southland and Fiordland, showers, some heavy with hail and snow above 300 metres. Becoming fine early tomorrow with frosts or fog possible, but the odd evening shower along the Otago coast. And for the Chatham Islands, showers, some heavy with possible thunderstorms and hail tomorrow. RNZ National, it's 5:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint with John Campbell.
Thank you very much indeed, Anna Thomas, and thank you everyone for joining us. Coming up, the government's cathedral contribution. Will it swing the pendulum in Christchurch? We're there, of course. And the very high price of petrol, more on that coming up later. But we begin tonight in the Bay of Plenty township of Matata, where 34 properties, including 16 homes, have been identified as so prone to debris and heavy flooding that the District Council's own papers warn of, and I quote, loss of life risk. Tonight, Checkpoint can reveal those warnings were first sounded in 2005. In May of that year, Matata was swamped by debris after heavy rainfall. If you're watching on Sky, Freeview or Facebook, the pictures we're about to show you look like a tsunami has hit. A GeoNet report into what they call the disaster said, and again I quote, there are areas around Matata where it is unsafe to live. More warnings followed. Checkpoint has obtained that paperwork. But homes that have been destroyed or damaged or were on high-risk land were allowed to remain or be rebuilt. The council believed that they could mitigate the risk with a number of schemes, including a debris net. But that never eventuated. And now people who rebuilt after 2005 or who have bought in the high-risk area since then face removal. They want to know why it's taken 12 years to get to this point. We begin tonight with Michelle Beach, who was at home in May 2005, torrential rain falling, when she and her family heard a very loud bang.
And we didn't know what that meant at the time, but about 15 minutes, half an hour later, the whole neighbourhood just filled up with mud and debris. Didn't know where it came from. I was thinking, oh my God, what is that? He said, get in the truck, because he knew it was bad. So he went out, got in the truck, and I fluffed around in the girls' room trying to grab nappies and stuff like that, and looked out my window and just couldn't believe what I was seeing. It was like my neighbourhood was suddenly full of mud and debris, and yeah, I just couldn't believe it. Anyway, we got in the truck, drove out to my brother's front gate because he owns the section in front of mine. I was in the middle one. Saw what was coming from down the road and thought, oh hell, we can't drive out in that. So turned around, went back to the house, and then basically he had to kick the back door in because it was locked. I went in, pulled my dining table into the hallway, put a dressing table on top of that, a chair on top of that, climbed into the ceiling of a 10-foot stud villa because it seemed like the safest place to be at the time. And we floated around in that house for 3.5 hours on the night, just floating, thinking, shit, I hope we're not going to die. Boulders, trees, the size of, just amazing, the size of things, bashing around underneath the house. Eventually, my house went into the gap between the house and shed in front and stopped moving. So my husband pushed some of the wall out and we jumped into the neighbour's house because his house was stationary. And yeah, looking out the windows, just couldn't recognise my neighbourhood.
What street were you on, Michelle?
We were on Clem Elliott Drive.
And were you allowed to rebuild there? What happened after 2005?
Well, what happened afterwards is that I didn't have the money to rebuild. I had small children and my urgent need was to get us back into a house of our own. So I've bought a house up in the middle of the town in Wilson Street, which is where I still live. But a lot of my neighbours rebuilt because in the beginning the council said, oh, we're going to build this really neat debris catchment net, even though we were all like, oh, whatever, you know? So
I just need to clarify this. So Clem Elliott Drive was where you were and that was severely damaged in 2005.
Severely.
So homes written off?
Yeah, absolutely.
And after the flooding, you were allowed to return. Sorry, not you, but people per se were allowed to return to Clem Elliott Drive.
Yeah, because they were going to build the debris catchment net up until, I think, 2012 they decided, oh no, that was never going to work, even though we were saying in the beginning, that's never going to work. But, they haven't listened to us from the beginning.
Now, I have a Tonkin and Taylor document.
Yes.
It's a map, an aerial map, and in 2 flooding scenarios, Clem Elliott Drive appears on the aerial map as vulnerable to fatal injury in heavy flooding. Did you know that?
Yep.
When did you find that out?
Oh, I knew on the night of the 18th of May. After what happened to us.
So why were you allowed back? Why were people allowed to rebuild their lives there?
Because they were going to build this fantastic debris catchment net, right?
And was it ever built?
No, because they found out that the surrounding area is silt and boulders.
So people are still living there?
People are still living there.
The same area that was flooded in 2005, the area that is identified as vulnerable to fatal injury, people are still living there?
Yep.
And
that's because when they said, oh, well, we'll put this debris catchment net in and that'll catch all the debris and then it'll just be flooding that you will experience, right? So what they've done is they spent millions on expensive reports and all of this stuff saying, oh, you know, we're going to do this and we're going to do that, and they've never done any of it. All they've done is made Tonkin and Taylor really rich. They haven't paid anyone out. They let all these people build beautiful houses down there again by the sea.
So what do you want to say to the Whakatane District Council about the fact that they have known for some years now that there are people in Matata on a number of streets living in homes that are vulnerable to fatal injury in the event of heavy flooding?
Oh, I don't even know what I want to say to them. I'm just so angry with them for the 12 years of bullshit that we've put up with, of them telling us what we're going to do.
And this is not hypothetical. You've had that heavy flooding. You had that heavy flooding in 2005.
Yeah, I floated around in my house for 3.5 hours thinking me and my kids were going to die.
It now appears that some people are going to be required to leave.
Yeah, and I'm one of those people.
And do you know what terms you will retreat under? Do you know what sort of compensation or payment you will receive?
They will pay me $200,000 they've offered, which is what the section is apparently valued at back in 2004.
$200,000 full and final payment?
Yep.
How do you know that?
Because they came round just before Christmas with a package from the real estate agent saying this is what we're laying out, this is how much we're prepared to pay you.
And so having lived through 2005, having lived there for over a decade since, despite the risk of a severe flood event and what it might do in that community, you are now being compelled to leave.
Yeah.
Does any of this make any sense to you?
No. And, the council, they've changed hands. I think there's only one person that's still there that was there originally, and that's Jeff Farrell, the planning officer. Everyone else is different. The mayor's different. All the other councillors have changed. Do you know what I mean? It's like they've been able to pass the buck on to the next lot the whole time. They've spent millions and millions on consultants and patting themselves on the back for what a good job they're doing. And they've just shafted us. They're still shafting us.
That was Michelle Beach. Later in the program we'll hear from a homeowner, Marilyn, who rebuilt after 2005. She would have gone then, she tells us, if they'd been paid a fair value to leave. But they stayed and they started again because they'd been told the risk would be mitigated. And she's furious they're being asked to leave now, 12 years on. That's after 6. But let's go to the District Council. Judy Turner is Deputy Mayor. She told me that at first the Council, and this was before her time, believed mitigation schemes would work. But in 2012, they were told a debris net wouldn't make the homes sufficiently safe.
So since then, we wanted to really establish clearly in our minds and scientifically that the level of risk was indeed intolerable and that the risk to life was real. So for the last 18 months to 2 years, we have been aware and have had confirmed to us by scientists that living in the Awatarariki fanhead has a considerable risk for people to remain there in their homes.
Why has it taken so long for you to know that? GeoNet said in 2005 there are areas around Matata where it is unsafe to live. Tonkin and Taylor in 2013 gave the Whakatane District Council, IEU, a map with 5 streets identified as having assumed vulnerability to fatal injury in the event of severe flooding.
Absolutely. So, I mean, once we've got that absolutely clear, that was always the concern right back at the beginning, but for people to be asked to voluntarily retreat from their property, you want to give them clear evidence. Once we have the evidence, then we have to begin the journey of discussing this with the people involved, and there's a number of households involved. And
didn't the council, and this predates you, I know, didn't the council have clear evidence in 2005? They had the flood, they had GeoNet explicitly saying there are areas around Matata where it is unsafe to live. Why is this journey, to use your word, only reaching some resolution in July 2017?
I think because there was a real hope at the very beginning of the journey by previous councils that they could find an engineering solution that would mitigate the risk to life so that people could remain on their properties. And that's certainly what people at the time said they wanted.
So when did it become painfully, explicitly apparent that that was not going to be the case?
Well, 2012, we were informed by the engineers working on the project that they could not guarantee that it would be successful, and so therefore we had to pull the plug on that for any further development. We then went back to, now in the absence of an engineering solution, we went back to geotech experts and said, now you need to make this perfectly clear before we start taking some serious steps. And so we were given that fact. We've now allocated staffing resource towards working household by household with
now,
these families.
Forgive me, that was 2012, 5 years on, and I'm looking at a council document
It was probably more 2014 by the time we had unequivocal evidence that this was a risk to life.
Okay, I'm looking at a council document that's just come out in May. So what's that? Let's say 6 weeks ago. The council decided to initiate a change to the district plan, which, if approved, would remove the current residential zoning and prevent any further development in this area. So the flooding was in 2005. GeoNet said in 2005 it was unsafe. Tonkin Taylor identified in 2013 that there were 5 streets that were susceptible, vulnerable to potentially fatal flooding. And as recently as May, you were discussing changing current residential zoning to prevent further development in this area.
That's, to be honest with you, John, that is just a very small part of what has to happen. We clearly have to remove that from being a residential zone, but you have to understand.
You still haven't done that, so I could still build.
Well, that's a very short walk to do that. That's a matter of we've just actually notified our plan. That's a journey that we can do very easily. But just to clarify, that still hasn't been done. So I could still, under the current district plan, build in this area. No, you would never be given permission because we know what's happening in the pipeline. So you would not be given permission to build.
Right, but you haven't formalised that in the district plan, have you?
No, but that's not difficult to do. Here's the problem we face. Under all the legislation that governs us as a territorial authority, we do not have the final say on removing people's existing property rights. So even if we rezone this land non-residential, people with existing use rights could still legitimately stay there. What is required, so these people will be required to leave, is that the regional council changes their plan, and they are the ones that have the power to require retreat. We have not got that ability. We've taken it as far as we can. We've talked to the regional council about their need to step up because it is they that are the ones that have the power to require people to leave, undo the existing use rights. They at this stage have shown no interest in doing that. So what we can do is we can put an application to them to have that changed, and we're going to do that. In parallel with that process, we are currently discussing with the people involved a voluntary retreat package, which would incentivise people. So we can't force them to leave. So we are providing an incentive.
Can the regional council force them to leave?
Yes, they can.
Would you like the regional council to do that?
What I'd like the regional council to do is to change their plan. I'd like them to come to the party because the amount of money it will take for us to actually provide a reasonable incentive for people to leave is beyond the financial capacity of this council. We are reliant on the regional council and probably central government to help us with the funding that will be needed.
Have you asked central government for help with the funding?
Yes, we have.
Okay, and what has central government's reply been?
We haven't heard anything really of any concrete thing.
When did you ask them?
I'm just trying to think when that would have been. We certainly notified certain ministers that we think where this would fall within their ministries, that if we're going to help these people retreat, that it's going to cost money and more money than the council can. More debt than the council is already carrying for this project.
And when do you want this to happen by? When do you want the people?
Tomorrow would be fine by me.
Judy Turner, Deputy Mayor. Tomorrow, we asked the Bay of Plenty Regional Council if they'd received a formal request from Whakatane District Council to make a plan change so it could acquire properties in the affected area. Remember, people rebuilt after 2005, and many say they would have been happy to go then, but they've started their lives afresh in the 12 years since, and they want a fair payment if they're going to go. Now, in a statement, the Regional Council's planning manager, David Fizaklia, said while it was aware of the District Council's intentions, no decision has been made as no request has been received. No request has been received. That's what the Regional Council is saying. Mr Fizaklia said any planning changes would need to be expedited to give certainty to the Matata community and residents. If the plan wasn't accepted, an independent hearing panel would be established and the public would be consulted. So 12 years on, this is still ongoing. We wanted to talk to Local Government Minister Anne Tolley about government funding to ensure property owners are paid fair sums to leave. Her office hasn't replied to us. We will keep trying. Coming up on Checkpoint, the government offers a $25 million contribution towards the restoration of the Christchurch Cathedral. Just days after it was revealed Peter Thiel gained citizenship after spending just 12 days in the country, the American owners of successful Lower Hutt business prepare to leave the country for not meeting visa requirements. And petrol prices. Don't forget you can text us 2101. We'd love to hear from you, particularly if you live in or near Matata and you know that community. You can also tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, Facebook Checkpoint with John Campbell, or email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. It's 5:25. Thank you for being with us. New Zealanders are probably paying too much for their petrol at the pump, and motorists in Wellington and the South Island are being hardest hit. A government-ordered study has found retail petrol margins have increased significantly over the last 5 years, and fuel prices might not be reasonable. It found the 9.9 cent per litre margin difference between South Island and Wellington versus the rest of the North Island can't be explained by higher costs down south. Eric Frickberg reports.
Gunning that engine probably costs you more than it should. One person who thinks so is none other than the Minister of Energy, Judith Collins.
The study is pretty clear that people are probably paying a little bit too much for petrol.
And every little bit adds up. Mrs Collins reckons every cent added to the price of petrol equates to an extra $30 million flowing into the coffers of oil companies. And there are plenty of cents being added to the gross margin or markup charged by petrol stations.
It's gone from 9.1 cents in 2010 to just recently it was at 29 cents. So over 7 years, it's gone up by 3 times.
The authors of this report were hampered by not getting enough information, but they were sure of one thing. Gross margins at service stations have risen, while fuel margins for commercial aviation and road users are flat or falling. Motorists spoken to by RNZ News agreed petrol prices were a problem.
Way too high. Some people can't even afford to go to work, take the kids to school.
Yes, they are at the moment.
Bloody rip-off. They're bloody rip-off.
If they want to instruct the fuel companies to charge less, I'm fine with that. Everyone can do with the extra couple of bucks in their pocket.
The report carries several caveats. Not all the information the authors needed was made available to them, so its conclusion is cautious but clear. Quote, "We cannot definitely say that fuel prices in New Zealand are reasonable, but we have reason to believe that they might not be." Unquote. Mark Stockdale of the Automobile Association says even if that's as far as the report goes, it's still a distance worth travelling.
It's a worthwhile exercise to have done this, because what it confirms is that fuel prices have been rising, the fuel company margins have been rising. The reasons for that increase are not clear, but they're not fully explained by rising costs.
Judith Collins says more research is needed. The report itself says the same thing. The main fuel companies are saying little, although Z Energy says its economic returns are in line with domestic and international peers. And it insists the fuel industry is in fact more competitive than it has ever been, with independent operators making up 20% of the retail market. The general manager of Gull, Dave Bodger, says it comes down to competition, and his company can't effectively get fuel into Wellington or the South Island.
We bring competition to an area where we can deliver from our terminal in Mount Maunganui. We can't get fuel into the South Island or effectively into Wellington to open sites. But if there was open terminal access, then potentially we could, us and others, bring greater competition.
The Taxpayers Union says the government shouldn't blame the industry, but look in the mirror and reduce its exorbitant taxes on fuel. For Checkpoint, Eric Frickberg, Tene.
A new government offer to help fund the $100 million plus restoration of Christchurch Cathedral has been described as possibly altering, quote, the swing of the pendulum when it comes to deciding the building's fate. The badly damaged cathedral has been caught in a kind of standoff for the past 6 years, with the Anglican Church, or at least the bishop, favouring a new build and some heritage advocates pushing for restoration. Today, the government put a new offer for restoration of the cathedral on the table ahead of a meeting in September when the Anglican Synod will vote on what should be done with the building. We have covered this at length on Checkpoint, of course, but this is a move by the government. Maya Burry reports.
The government is now offering $25 million in funding and loans to repair Christchurch's most recognisable building, bringing the estimated available funds for reinstatement to $90 million. That would be enough to complete the cathedral and ancillary buildings. The minister supporting Greater Christchurch regeneration, Nikki Wagner, is hopeful the synod will accept the offer.
This is all about the social and the economic well-being of the city. This is not about funding a church, it's about protecting a Category 1 significant heritage building, a community facility and a tourist attraction.
Ms Wagner says if the church decides to demolish the heritage building, there could be years of legal wrangling ahead. She says it is important for the people of Christchurch the cathedral doesn't remain in a state of decay.
It is the only option that is planned, costed and funded. Any option that could end us up in court for 5 or more years is no option at all. We need a decision now for the well-being of our community.
The $90 million of available funds includes $42 million of the church's insurance proceeds, a nearly $14 million pledge from the Great Christchurch Buildings Trust, and a $10 million grant from the Christchurch City Council, which is subject to public consultation. Some people RNZ News spoke to in Cathedral Square want the building to be saved, but others don't think ratepayers should have to foot the bill.
I think the money could be better directed elsewhere. I don't think it's in keeping with the surroundings anymore.
I think it should be rebuilt. It's such a beautiful building. It's a shame to see it tumbling down and be taken down, yeah.
I think spending money on it is a total extravagance.
I think they should rebuild it like it was before. I think it gives the city something original among all these modern buildings.
Bishop Victoria Matthews was overseas today when the offer was formally presented to the church, but in a statement she said the offer was generous. A church property trustee who will be voting at Synod's September meeting, Corin Murfitt, says the offer will be seriously considered.
Well, I think it's a very generous offer. And certainly an offer which is an improvement on the other offers we've had. I think it probably has altered the swing of the pendulum. We still don't know which way the pendulum is going to finish up, but it will have made some difference to the thought processes, I'm sure.
Dr Murfitt says public opinion on what should be done with the cathedral is likely to remain divided, but at the end of the day it's up to Synod, made up of 200 clergy and elected members, to decide its fate.
So it's a very difficult thing, and surprisingly, I think, I don't know, it is surprising actually, but the more people you speak to now seem to think they want a rebuild of a new cathedral. So it is a difficult situation. So we're not going to please anybody or everybody, obviously.
The government says its offer will expire after Synod's meeting on September 9th, and if it votes to demolish the building, it will be back to square one. In Christchurch for Checkpoint, Maya Burry.
27 to 6 exactly. Let's go straight to headlines with Anna Thomas.
The fuel company Z Energy has hit back at a report that says the price of petrol is too high and there's insufficient competition. The report commissioned by the government says prices at the pump are probably too high, especially in the South Island and Wellington. The Whakatane District Council says the loss of life risk in Matata, Bay of Plenty, due to flooding and debris is so high, 34 properties need to be abandoned. The council wants to buy the properties identified as being at high risk. The Building and Construction Minister has been challenged on his statement that housing affordability is in the eye of the beholder. Nick Smith was responding to questions about why the government and the Auckland Council can't say how many affordable homes have been built in special housing areas. North Korea has fired another ballistic missile. The US military says the intermediate range missile flew for about 40 minutes before landing in the Sea of Japan. A property trustee for Christchurch's quake-damaged cathedral says a new $25 million government offer to help fund the building's restoration is generous. The Anglican Church favours a new building, while some heritage advocates want the cathedral restored. A long-term study of people born in 1977 has found early childhood education has lasting effects, including higher incomes and better qualifications. The Christchurch Health and Development Study found its subjects got persistent benefits from early learning, especially if they were enrolled for 2 to 3 years. The Supreme Court has rejected an appeal by the man who raped and killed Auckland woman Blessy Gutinko. Tony Robertson was ordered to spend at least 24 years behind bars for running over the North Shore mother of 3 and then brutally murdering her in 2014. And that's the news.
Thank you so much, Anna. Housing affordability in the eye of the beholder. We'll have more on that coming up. And Chris Mowat's just emailed in. Judith Collins seems to have conveniently forgotten that for every dollar spent on petrol, more than 50% goes to the government in taxes, which of course you knew, Nona Peltier. Our excellent business reporter sitting beside us. The latest Institute of Economic Research survey shows business confidence is steady despite soft activity in the construction sector. What's going on?
Yeah, well, the construction sector, the overall optimism in terms of the outlook for business is steady. I mean, a little bit better than it was in the last quarter. So the June quarter, net 18% compared with net 16%. So that's a slight improvement, but still steady. However, in the construction sector, which has really been fueling so much of our growth, it has changed quite a lot. There was a distinct softening there. We went to a net 18 from 31% in that quarter. And that's partly because of capacity constraints. There's problems with getting skilled staff and, of course, materials that are necessary. However, economists think that this is a one-off type of thing and that it's going to pick up again, because underlying all of that is a lot of demand for housing. So how long can we expect a constraint in the construction sector to persist? Not very long, but we'll see what happens. However, that said, the retail sector is also under pressure. Lots of competition, not just amongst retailers within New Zealand, but international too, is holding prices down. That's not necessarily driving inflation. Overall, we're seeing the Reserve Bank likely to hold on to its stance on interest rates for a while longer, and we'll see what happens from here. So I guess we won't know really whether we're in a trend situation until the next quarter. Yeah. Yeah. And that's coming up, right, till the end of September. So it's going to be a while before we figure it out.
Is that before or after the election? That's interesting, isn't it? Because it's probably about exactly the same time as the election.
Well, and also that also plays into it. You know, the election also makes people a little bit more cautious about making investments. So the uncertainty, people don't like that. And interesting, we were talking about interest rates just a second ago. The Reserve Bank of Australia put out their statement today, holding their interest rates at 1.5%. And you would have thought that would have just pleased the market, but it didn't. And they were not very they didn't actually change their outlook. They maintained this neutral stance, and that saw the Australian dollar fall almost 0.5% against the US dollar and 0.5 cent against the New Zealand currency this afternoon. So, you know, there's a lot of volatility out there in terms of what the market.
From across the Tasman at the moment too.
Yeah. So, anyways, that's how the market reacted. Didn't like that, and so if you fail to meet expectations, you're going to expect change.
You're in trouble, Nona.
That's right. So
what else did the markets do today?
Well, okay, so we'll just stick with the currency for a moment. 72.7 US cents, 95.4 Australian, and 56.2 British pence, so not too much changed. The top 50 index, though, it rose a bit today, rose 0.4%, up 32 points to 7,621, which is edging back towards that record high again.
Nona Peltier, beside me in the studio here. Thank you very much indeed, Nona. An American family who've spent the last 4 years running a successful business in Lower Hutt are preparing to leave the country for not meeting visa requirements. The Jensens moved to the Hutt Valley in 2013 when they bought a cafe and turned it into a profitable business. But they missed a target attached to their visa, and now they could have to go. The news comes just days after it was revealed American billionaire Peter Thiel was granted citizenship after spending only 12 days in the country. We've covered that at length too. Michael Kropp reports.
The cafe is shut, the home sold, and a container of furniture shipped off to the United States. Yet Steve Jensen, who moved here with his wife and 4 children, still wants to stay.
When we embarked in 2013, we didn't come on a halfway trip. We sold everything to be here. We have no ties back in America, other than a few family members here and there. But we have no property. We have no belongings. We sold everything to be here. So would we do it again after experiencing the New Zealand people? Absolutely. Absolutely.
But the business plan their immigration advisors submitted when applying for their long-term business visas overstated the cafe's profit margins and projected an unrealistic 45% increase in sales in the first 3 years.
The one goal that immigration said, standalone, that we were not a significant benefit to the country. And what that meant was that the cafe was not profitable. And that's been a little bit of a hot topic, because as I measured profitability, Michael, our profitability was, in my opinion, we pay ourselves a wage, it's a living wage, we employ people, and we're still operating in the black. That's profitability.
So, last Friday, the Jensens shut the cafe and put it on the market. In 10 days, they'll fly out to Houston, Texas. All up, leaving the country will cost them about $80,000. Mark Ogden co-owns the cafe building with the Jensens. His business on the mezzanine overlooks the cafe.
Well, Steve was a real personality. I mean, he was out the front there, very welcoming. It was a bustling place. As you can see now, it's dead. And from our business perspective, it's had a major impact. So, you know, it's the front door to our business.
Mr. Ogden says the Immigration Department isn't looking at the bigger picture of what the Jensens offer the community.
Since the Jensens have purchased the cafe with us, I mean, we've sort of had a lot higher profile in the community. I mean, we employed 3 new staff. You know, it enabled us to sort of expand our operations.
And the Jensens' customers are effusive in their praise. Jane Thompson says it's completely unfair.
They've been fantastic people in the community. They're really friendly, and every time I've gone in there with my 6-year-old daughter, they've talked to us as if we're long-lost friends. They're just awesome people. They're friendly and they're good and they make fantastic coffee.
Phil Finlay is disgusted at the government's inaction.
They should stay in our country. Get rid of some of those other people that are not contributing or an asset to our country. We don't need losers in our country, we need winners, and they're a winning family. They need to stay here.
The decision now sits with the Associate Minister of Immigration, Scott Simpson, and the Jensens remain hopeful of a last-minute reprieve. For Checkpoint, Carmichael Cropper-Ho.
Let's stay in the Hutt Valley, where the reaction to plans to build an extra 330 new homes to house people who are sleeping rough and bring hundreds more up to warm, dry standards is along the lines of better late than never. The Social Housing Minister, Amy Adams, says about 60% of the new houses will be state-owned or affordable. Adriana Webber reports.
Ms Adams made the announcement on a vacant lot of Housing New Zealand land on Senan Street in Nainai, one of 4 sites in Lower Hutt where work will start immediately to build 30 new state homes. It's the same site where just 3 months ago dozens of people sat in protest, calling for the government to tackle the city's housing crisis. That weekend-long protest was organised by St David's Church, whose Reverend Martin Robinson has been seeing scores of people come to him desperate for accommodation.
We were very aware of guys coming out of prison or other folks who were looking for single flats that just absolutely couldn't get anything at all. They were way down the pecking order in terms of priorities. We knew of folks living in garages, living behind hedges, under bridges, and just couch surfing.
He says it's great the government has finally taken action, but he's worried about those who need accommodation right now.
You need new buildings, you need refurbished ones, but also you need emergency accommodation too, which I know they're aware of and they're trying to work at. But I'm just pleased that they have actually listened to people and clearly they're responding, which is good. We just need more of it and possibly a bit sooner.
The Mayor of Lower Hutt, Ray Wallace, says house prices in the city are going through the roof and it's putting a lot of pressure on people.
On average 25% over the last 3-year increase, in some areas as much as 39% increase in property values. It means that people are missing out currently and the demand on rental properties is very high. So once we get this underway, I think that will help ease some of those concerns.
The remaining 300 homes are to be built in the suburbs of Ipuni, Nainai and Waifetu at a cost of $9.5 million, but the project is still in the planning stages. Amy Adams says those houses will help people who are struggling to rent or buy their own homes.
At least 100 will be social houses, at least 60 will be affordable homes, and the rest will be market homes. And that's important, as we've been discussing more recently in the Auckland context, so that those communities have a sense of mixed tenure and are a mix of social market and affordable homes.
Amy Adams says a further $68 million will be spent on refurbishing 383 existing homes over the next 3 to 5 years. The Labour Party leader, Andrew Little, says it's taken far too long for the government to act.
Every time I go out there, the number one issue that people raise with me is housing. And there's those empty plots of land out there. They've been boarded up state houses for years. And now, 3 months out from the election, the National Party suddenly realises this is a problem. I mean, give me a break. This has been around for a long time and they've done nothing about it until now.
The first of the newly built houses will be ready next year for people to move into. For Checkpoint, this is Adriana Webber.
We're going to stay with housing. The Building and Construction Minister says his statement, housing affordability is, quote, in the eye of the beholder, merely reflects the fact one person could view a house as affordable but could be out of reach for another. Nick Smith was challenged on his comment in Parliament this afternoon as the government came under continued pressure over its record on housing and home affordability. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
RNZ News has revealed the Auckland Council can't say how many affordable houses have been built in the last 4 years in the special housing areas. It set up more than 150 SHAs with the government in order to fast-track the building of tens of thousands of new homes. Under the deal, at least 10% of large developments have to have cheaper homes for first home buyers on modest incomes. The Greens co-leader Matata Tude asked Dr Smith about his response.
Does the Minister stand by his statement he made this morning that, quote, affordability is in the eye of the beholder, end quote?
Mr Speaker. The Honourable Dr Nick Smith. It is absolutely true that what is an affordable house does vary depending on a person's circumstances. And the fact that there has been 5,000 homes in special housing areas that have been built. And I note Mr Twyford is interjecting. They announced the policy 4 years ago saying affordability was 300,000. Then they made it 400,000. Then they made it 500,000.
The Labour leader Andrew Little wanted to know about the number of affordable houses, putting this question to the Prime Minister Bill English.
Has he asked his housing ministers for a report of how many affordable houses have been built in the Auckland special housing areas? And if not, why not?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, no, but I would expect that the Auckland Council, who argued vigorously for those requirements, will collect the information.
Mr English was then asked if foreign speculators would be free to buy houses in the project announced for Lower Hutt today and in Auckland.
Well, Mr Speaker, I know the Labour Party is very focused on, I think, the 3% of overseas resident taxpayers, many of whom who may or may not be what he calls speculators. What you know is that in a market where more supply is coming to the market more quickly than ever, and house prices are flattening, then the room for speculation is very minimal.
Mr Little then moved on to the challenges facing those looking to get into the housing market.
How can he expect to be believed on housing when core logic says the number of sales to first home buyers is at its lowest level in 20 years?
There may be arguments about what those numbers actually mean. What we know is that the housing market is going through an adjustment, and that will have, well, now the members were against the prices going up, and now they're against them not going up.
In terms of the information the Auckland Council does hold, it says it's received 83 statutory declarations since April 2016 from developers who had sold an affordable house to someone who fit the criteria. Of those declarations, 49 were in West Auckland, 23 in Central Auckland, 11 in South Auckland and none in North Auckland. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Jane Patterson.
You're with Checkpoint on RNZ. It's coming up to 11 minutes to 6. Let's go to New Jersey, where the Governor of the state has gone into full-scale damage control as he faces what can only be called a PR disaster. Chris Christie, we'll all remember him, of course, from following Donald Trump around, was pictured enjoying a day at the beach with his family. In fact, they had the whole beach to themselves. Just days earlier, Christie and his officials had closed all parks and beaches to the public due to a wrangle over passing the state budget. The photos have been published in a local paper and then they've gone far and wide, sparking a storm of controversy. Colette Luke reports.
New Jersey Governor Chris Christie is taking heat for taking heat. Christie was seen relaxing at Island Beach State Park Sunday, even though it was closed to everyone else amid the government shutdown. Christie was defensive when asked about it at a news conference on Sunday.
I didn't get any sun today. No, there's no one at Island Beach State Park. There are no lifeguards. There's no one to pick up the garbage. There's no one providing any services at Island Beach State Park. So my question is, next. Excuse me, next. I'm done. We're talking about the closure of government, and you're talking about your TMZ stuff.
New Jersey's government shut down Friday night after Christie and state lawmakers failed to pass a budget. Essential services like the New Jersey Transit continued to operate, but non-essential state services, which include more than 50 state parks and recreational areas, were closed for the extended 4th of July weekend. Christie said on Sunday he was planning to head back to his official beach home by a state helicopter.
Yeah, that's where my family is sleeping, so that's where I'll sleep tonight. When I have a choice between sleeping with my family or sleeping alone, I generally like to sleep where my family is.
The shutdown is the result of a deadlock prompted by a plan backed by Christie to take money from the state's biggest health insurance company to fund drug addiction services.
That is cement in the sand for me.
Assembly Speaker and Democrat Vincent Prieto says the plan is bad public policy and should not be considered until after a budget is passed. Christie has ordered state lawmakers to return in hopes of making a deal to reopen the government and the beaches in time for July 4th, so residents and tourists can enjoy them just like the governor.
That report from Reuters. Let's head home again. Researchers show people who went to play centre or kindergarten in the early 1980s are now earning thousands of dollars more than those who did not. This is from the Christchurch Health and Development Study. It says 1,200 people it's been tracking since 1977 are reaping persistent benefits from the early childhood education they received more than 35 years ago. The Otago University project says on average they're earning more and have higher qualifications than those who did not go to early childhood education before they started school. Our education correspondent John Gerritsen filed this report.
The study participants are now approaching 40, but 35 years ago, 93% of them were in early childhood education. Some in a play centre, but most at a kindergarten like this.
What's there inside?
The Health and Development Study has found that early experience has been paying dividends for years. The study's director, John Horwood, says the effect is strongest for 32% of the study's participants who were in early education for 2 to 3 years.
Children who attended early childhood education for 2 years or longer did better at high school and scored slightly better on measures of cognitive ability, and as adults they tended to come out being slightly better off socioeconomically, have slightly higher incomes, be more likely to be participating in the paid workforce and so on.
The study says by the age of 30, those with 2 to 3 years of early childhood education were earning an average $7,000 a year more than those with none, and $5,000 more than those who went for less than a year. John Horwood says some of that is the result of better secondary school and tertiary qualifications, but early childhood education helped people get those. He says adults who went to play centre and kindergarten as children are generally better off than those who didn't.
You will have had a slightly higher income trajectory across your life course, probably slightly greater participation in paid employment across the life course, and those differences, they're not huge, but they are consistent, in the long term are going to translate into greater long-term well-being.
Claire Wells from Kindergartens New Zealand says the study shows the benefits of early education are the same for children of all backgrounds.
A lot of the discussion at the moment is that the most benefit from ECE is for children from challenging backgrounds or disadvantaged backgrounds, but actually what the report shows is that the benefits are widely spread right across socio-economic communities and ethnicity.
These days, children go to early childhood education for more hours and over more years than was the case 35 years ago. In addition, early learning centres are the dominant provider, and a lot more children under the age of 2 are now enrolled. An associate professor at the University of Waikato, Linda Mitchell, says that makes comparisons between then and now difficult.
The international literature shows that long hours in poor quality early childhood for very young children can be detrimental. So I guess what I want to reinforce is the absolute importance of quality.
Linda Mitchell says there needs to be more large-scale research into how early learning is affecting children. For Checkpoint, John Gerritsen.
Let's have a look at some sport now. The Silver Ferns gold medal chances at the Commonwealth Games have suffered a pretty serious setback following the decision by veteran mid-quarter Laura Langman to remain playing in Australia. Now, Langman was integral to the Sunshine Coast Lightning winning the new Australian domestic competition this season. She's re-signed for 2018, making her ineligible for the Silver Ferns. Sally Murphy reports.
Laura Langman has played 141 tests for the Silver Ferns, but it's not enough to make Netball New Zealand change its policy over having to play in New Zealand to be eligible for the national side. Langman says the past couple of weeks have been an emotional roller coaster as she made up her mind, but says she understands Netball New Zealand's stance.
They've been very clear right from the onset, and I totally respect that. I'm well aware I'm a very, very small cog in a big wheel, and Netball New Zealand's responsibility is to do what is best for netball in New Zealand and also the Silver Ferns. And sometimes, you make decisions in life that you don't get closure, you just got to move on.
While playing in the Australian competition has ruled her out of the Silver Ferns test this year, Langman acknowledges the prospect of having to watch from the sidelines if New Zealand plays Australia in a gold medal match at next year's Commonwealth Games on the Gold Coast is heart-wrenching.
It'll be sad, man. Yeah, absolutely. We do everything to represent the black dress and to be the best people and players that we can be. So I think you'd have to be a robot for it not to have feelings.
Do you have any ambition to come back and play in New Zealand?
I certainly have not shut the door from my end.
And is there any chance of you playing for Australia in the future, given they've relaxed their eligibility rules?
I think they have their mid-court pretty covered, so I'm not really sure that would ever become a reality.
Netball New Zealand's acting chief executive David Cooper says Langman's decision won't force a review of the eligibility rules.
The Netball New Zealand board has been clear now for a length of time that the eligibility rules for Silver Fern selections are what they are, and we've remained in contact with Laura confirming those regulations.
The former Silver Ferns coach Yvonne Willering says when the eligibility rule was first introduced 2 years ago, she'd hoped it would be applied on a case-by-case basis. However, she doesn't believe Netball New Zealand should change its approach now.
Obviously, she's contributed massively, So do you make an exception for her, or do you stick to the focus and stick to the ruling that if you play over in Australia, you're not going to get selected? I think the total focus here is the ANZ Premiership, because if players go to Australia to play, it's going to weaken our competition further. And really, that's the only competition we have to prepare our players for a Silver Fern status.
It won't be long before the Silver Ferns learn what life is like without Laura Langman, with tests against Australia, England and South Africa starting next month. For Checkpoint, Sally Murphy.
What a fantastic player Laura Langman is. Lots of feedback coming in tonight on all the subjects we've covered. Let's start in Christchurch, the Cathedral. And Carswell asks, shortly after the earthquake, when people had got over the first shock, millions of dollars were pledged by friends all over the world for rebuilding of the cathedral. I've heard nothing about that since then. What's going on? Has anyone followed up on that? And we will. We will ask what's happened to that money. Daryl, on fuel prices. Well, I do not recall exact dates or prices, but as an approximation, recently, while diesel in Waihi was approximately $1.05 per litre, we saw it in Auckland at between $1.20 to $1.35 per litre. Most fuel stations that we saw in Auckland, mostly South and Central Auckland, were making a killing on 15 to 30 cents a litre higher than little old Waihi. No one seems to talk about diesel, but again, I think they must be making a wonderful profit. Back to the cathedral. John, after all the arguments over the past 5 years, I've come to the conclusion that Christchurch doesn't need a new cathedral at all. Let's save the government and council, save the money and take the bishop at her word and give all the insurance payout to the Anglican City Mission, says Margaret. And Bert, or Albert, says, I recently watched the Dutch Parliament in action, strong questioning, stimulating debate, serious approach to questions. Listening to Bill English on your program makes me wonder if they're serious about their role, or is it all just one big laugh? Who can make the smartest comment? Embarrassing. No wonder many people refuse to vote. Quite a few people having a go at Nick Smith, as is often the case when we have Nick Smith on Checkpoint, and about 98% of it is defamatory, but we do appreciate you getting in touch. Lots of feedback tonight, and just looking at a sample, John, could we please see an up-to-date photo of Matata, as those homeowners must have redeveloped their areas. It would be interesting to see what the compensation is being based on. Thank you. Yeah, we began the program with that tonight, and we'll go back to it after 6. And horrified to hear the Lower Hutt Cafe is closed. The cafe next to a centre that supports people with disabilities was always very welcoming of everyone. It was agreed to be the best cafe in the Hutt Valley. Fantastic coffee, lovely staff. Please let them stay. Their efforts made our community a better place. What a lovely way to be described. That was the Jensens, of course, who are being sent back to America, it appears, having failed to get approval to stay in New Zealand. Unlike Peter Thiel, as we've been pointing out. It's 6 o'clock.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Good evening, I'm Anna Thomas. A Matata resident says she's angry it's taken 12 years for the Whakatane District Council to decide some properties need to be abandoned because of the flooding risk. Properties in Matata were badly damaged in May 2005 when intense rain forced water and debris into the community. The Whakatane District Council says there is a loss of life risk in the coastal village, and it wants the Regional Council to acquire 34 properties at risk of future damage. Michelle Beach, whose home was damaged in 2005, told Checkpoint she's upset it's taken so long for the council to act and with the compensation that's been offered.
I'm just so angry with them for the 12 years of bullshit that we've put up with, of them telling us what we're going to do. They will pay me $200,000 they've offered, which is what the section is apparently valued at back in 2004.
Matata resident Michelle Beach. The fuel company Z Energy has hit back at a report that says the price of petrol is too high and there's insufficient competition in the fuel business. The report, commissioned by the government, says prices at the pump are probably too steep, especially in the South Island and Wellington. Eric Frickberg reports.
The report's task was hampered by inadequate information, and the authors want further investigation of oil company finances. But it did find gross margins or markups for petrol had soared in just a few years. However, Z Energy has told the stock exchange its economic returns are reasonable and in line with domestic and international peers. It says barriers to entry into the market by new energy companies are low, and independent participants now control 20% of the retail market. An independent company, Gull, says prices down south are made worse because it's shut out of access to terminals by its commercial rivals. This is Eric Frickberg.
North Korea has fired another ballistic missile. The US military says the intermediate-range missile flew for about 40 minutes before landing in the Sea of Japan. The BBC's Stephen Evans reports from Seoul.
This launch is different from previous ones because the estimated 37 minutes of flight implies a significant increase in range. In January, President Trump said that North Korea would not be allowed to get a nuclear-tipped missile capable of striking the mainland US. After this test, he tweeted, "Does this guy, Kim Jong-un, have nothing better to do?" Hitting the US isn't just about missile range. Warheads would need to re-enter the atmosphere, and that demands new materials. The United States military thinks this missile can't reach the US.
A property trustee for Christchurch's quake-damaged cathedral says a new government offer to help fund the building's restoration is generous. The Anglican Church favours a new building, while some heritage advocates want the cathedral restored. The government is offering $25 million in funding and loans to reinstate the cathedral, bringing the estimated available funds to $90 million. That figure includes a $14 million pledge from the Great Christchurch Buildings Trust and a $10 million grant from the Christchurch City Council, which is subject to consultation. Church property trustee Corinne Murfitt says the offer will be seriously considered when there's a vote on the building's fate at a meeting of the Church Synod in September. The man who raped and killed Auckland woman Blessie Gatinko has had a bid for a further appeal rejected. Tony Robertson was ordered to spend at least 24 years behind bars for running over the North Shore mother of 3 and then brutally murdering her in 2014. He had sought a hearing in the Supreme Court relating to whether the jury at his trial should have been told about the possibility the case was manslaughter rather than murder. The Supreme Court has declined the application, saying the verdict shows jurors were satisfied Robertson knew Mrs. Gatinko was still alive when he stabbed her after running her down. The Court of Appeal had earlier upheld his conviction and sentence. Research shows people who went to play centre or kindergarten in the early 1980s are now earning thousands of dollars more than those who didn't. The Christchurch Health and Development Study says people it's been tracking since 1977 are getting long-term benefits from early childhood education they received 35 years ago. Our education correspondent John Gerritsen reports.
The Otago University study says the subjects who participated in early education are earning more and have higher qualifications. It says the effect is strongest for the 32% who were in early education for 2 to 3 years. By the age of 30, that group was earning an average $7,000 a year more than those with no early education. The study says some of that is the result of better secondary school and tertiary qualifications, but early childhood education helped people get those. Ko John Gerritsen tēnei.
It's at 6:05. The All Blacks midfielder Ryan Crotty has been all but ruled out of Saturday's British and Irish Lions Test Series decider with injury. The 28-year-old damaged a hamstring in the first Test win but missed Saturday's second Test loss to the Lions. His absence, as well as the suspension of Sonny Bill Williams, opens the door for Malakai Fikitoa. Winger Wasaki Naholo is also in doubt due to concussion and could be replaced by Julian Thavea, who's yet to play in the series. The second half of the men's Big Four are in action at Wimbledon tonight with second seed Novak Djokovic and third seed Roger Federer both playing first round matches. The 35-year-old Federer skipped the French Open in order to be at his best physically for a tilt at an 8th Wimbledon crown.
This is clearly not an ideal preparation. I'll be fresh. That's the positive. But negative is I haven't had any matches whatsoever. Look, don't want to be at the mercy of my opponent. I want to take charge, play aggressive myself. So for that, I need to be fast on my feet and quick in my mind. So I just need enough rest so I can play enough inspired tennis.
And the women's top seed Angelique Kerber also plays her opening match tonight. Meanwhile, New Zealander Marina Irakovic isn't about to give up on the world circuit, despite her world ranking having slumped to 129. The 29-year-old was beaten in the first round today by second seed Simona Halep. And despite being on the circuit for 11 years, she says she still enjoys the competitive challenge. And that's the news.
Tonight on Nights, getting plastic waste out of our oceans, or stopping it from getting into them in the first place. Dr. Cy Taffel's organising a conference on that at Massey University. The writer Dame Hilary Mantel kicks off her Wreath lecture series on the role history plays in our present. And we have a window on the world of Hong Kong, especially the Hong Kong of those born there after Britain handed it back to China, on Nights from after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
And now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Wednesday. Northland to Waikato, also Coromandel. Cloudy periods and a few showers, especially tomorrow. Bay of Plenty, Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, mainly fine. Waitomo to Wellington, including the central high country and Wairarapa, fine apart from isolated showers. Marlborough and Nelson, fine with morning frosts or fog. Buller and Westland, a few showers north of Hokitika, clearing overnight. Otherwise fine with areas of frosts or fog tomorrow morning. For Canterbury, fine with morning frosts, showers about Banks Peninsula and 1 or 2 spreading inland tomorrow evening. Otago, Southland and Fiordland, showers, some heavy with hail and snow above 300 metres. Becoming fine early tomorrow with frosts or fog possible, but the odd evening shower along the Otago coast. And for the Chatham Islands, showers, some heavy with possible thunderstorms and hail tomorrow. RNZ National, it's 6:08. You're listening to Checkpoint with John Campbell.
Thank you very much indeed, Anna Thomas, reading the news wonderfully. Earlier in the program, we told you how Whakatane District Council has assessed the loss of life risk at 34 properties in Matata. Bay of Plenty is so great, people need to abandon their homes. Marilyn is one of those people who's been told she will need to leave, agree on a settlement, and if she doesn't, she may be forced off her land. We covered this at length after 5 when we spoke to Michelle. But Marilyn's home was also damaged in 2005 when intense rain sent a torrent of debris and water into the area. She would have gone if someone had asked her to and paid her out accordingly. That was in 2005. But after waiting and waiting, then being told it would be made safe to stay, Marilyn did.
They left us sitting in mud and boulders for 10 months. Then they allowed us to clean our sections in January 2006, which we did. And then we waited around 2007, because they had made a decision by then to mitigate the risk. We went through the housing and building determination and did everything legally and got the okay to build because they were going to mitigate the risk. So that's what we did.
And you rebuilt your home in 2007,
We rebuilt a much bigger home than what we had pre-flood.
because they told you they were going to mitigate the risk.
Yes.
And now it seems they're going to tell you to go.
It doesn't seem. That's exactly what they're telling us to do.
And would you have preferred to have gone in 2005, just been paid out then and started again somewhere else, rather than going through everything you went through, starting again, and now being asked to go?
Of course, I would have gone back in 2005.
So how do you feel about how you've been treated over the past 12 years?
I feel that it's just we've been lied to for 12 years, strung along. I'm not going. I'll fight it to the end.
Because if you were going to go, you would have gone in 2005 before you rebuilt your lives.
Of course we would have. We wouldn't have sunk all our money back into this if we knew this was where it was going to end. We wouldn't have laid concrete and landscaped and cleaned up council stuff that they didn't do. I don't know what to tell you. I've had 12 years of stress. I'm not the only one. We've had properties that have sold and new people have moved in. How do you think they feel?
So, people rebuilt after that extraordinary flooding event, the debris that really did serious damage to the town in 2005. But in 2005, GeoNet told the Whakatane District Council areas around Matata were unsafe. In 2013, a Tonkin and Taylor report identified 5 streets vulnerable to fatal injuries in the event of a repeat of such flooding. Judy Turner is the Whakatane District Council's Deputy Mayor. We spoke to her at length after 5. She told me the council initially believed mitigation schemes would work, but they didn't work, they haven't happened, and the area is now unsafe.
Here's the problem we face. Under all the legislation that governs us as a territorial authority, we do not have the final say on removing people's existing property rights. So even if we rezone this land non-residential, people with existing use rights could still legitimately stay there. What is required, so these people will be required to leave, is that the regional council changes their plan, and they are the ones that have the power to require retreat. We have not got that ability. We've taken it as far as we can. We've talked to the regional council about their need to step up, because it is they that are the ones that have the power to require people to leave, undo the existing use rights. They at this stage have shown no interest in doing that. So what we can do is we can put an application to them to have that changed, and we're going to do that. In parallel with that process, we are currently discussing with the people involved a voluntary retreat package, which would incentivise people. So we can't force them to leave. So we are providing an incentive.
Can the regional council force them to leave?
Yes, I can.
Would you like the regional council to do that?
What I'd like the regional council to do is to change their plan. I'd like them to come to the party, because the amount of money it will take for us to actually provide a reasonable incentive for people to leave is beyond the financial capacity of this council. We are reliant on the regional council and probably central government to help us with the funding that will be needed.
Have you asked central government for help with the funding?
Yes, we have.
Okay, and what has central government's reply been?
We haven't heard anything really of any concrete thing.
When did you ask them?
I'm just trying to think when it would have been. We certainly notified certain ministers that we think where this would fall within their ministries, that if we're going to help these people retreat, that it's going to cost money and more money than the council can, more debt than the council is already carrying for this project.
So we asked the Bay of Plenty Regional Council if it had received a formal request from the Whakatane District Council to make a plan change so it could acquire properties in the affected area. Remember, people were allowed to stay there after 2005. In a statement, the Regional Council's planning manager, David Fizaklia, said while it was aware of the District Council's intentions, no decision has been made as no request has been received. So the District Council and the Regional Council seem to be at odds there. We wanted to talk to Local Government Minister Anne Tolley, who coincidentally is a local MP, about government funding to ensure property owners are paid fair sums to leave, and how the people of Matata have found themselves in this position. Her office is yet to respond. It's coming up to 6:15. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ. 2 people are still recovering in Middlemore Hospital after a house exploded and caught fire in the Auckland suburb of New Windsor. Neighbours were woken up by the explosion, which ripped through the property at about 6 o'clock this morning. Jessie Chang has more.
Broken glass, metal sheeting and splintered wood cover the ground around the home on Mary Drever Street. Bits of wooden framing and large pieces of debris are all that remains of the house. Nearby residents say they could feel the blast shaking their own homes. One neighbour, Sharila Abdul Farouk, says people were confused and screaming and crying in the dark. She says her husband and another neighbour went to help the 2 people in the house.
We thought that something huge earthquake. Yeah. Every people here screaming, something happened, ran. Everything's dark, and then my husband bring that light, and then they ran and then rescued the people.
Fire and Emergency says a gas leak is most likely the cause of the blast and was triggered when an electrical switch was turned on. It says the 2 people in the house, a man and a woman, reported smelling gas before the explosion at about 4 a.m. The pair suffered burns from the explosion and were taken to hospital, one with moderate injuries and the other serious. A senior station officer at Avondale Fire Station, Chris Power, says the house is demolished.
It's completely blown apart. Yeah, it's completely blown apart. It's quite devastating damage. It's the house is pretty much on the ground and blew the roof right off, and the front wall of the house was blown about 8 metres into the side of the house next door.
Chris Power says it's rare to see an explosion of this magnitude. The fire and explosion are being treated as accidental. For Checkpoint, call Jessie Chang, aho.
Should the drinking age be raised to 20, returned to 20 effectively? MPs voted against it in 2012, but now Gareth Morgan is calling for a rethink. The Opportunities Party leader wants the drinking age raised, the alcohol purchase age raised, and the cost of alcohol to increase by 10% through excise tax. But what do other party leaders think? Our producer Bridget Burke did a ring around and began by calling New Zealand First Leader Winston Peters.
Well, I think we should ask the young people in this country, because a whole lot of them do think that the age is far too young, and they've seen too much irresponsible behaviour, because all you do is shift the level of illegality down 2 or 3 years, and that's what's happened. New Zealand First has always had that policy because it was the one that the police supported at the time, and a massive majority of young people also supported the drinking age being at 20 when they were polled. So that's what our policy was, and we still think that that would be the most sound thing to do.
David Seymour from the ACT Party. It's a beat up on young people. There is no evidence that drinking is an age-related problem, and as a matter of fact, the volume of alcohol drunk and the frequency of binge drinking has been declining now for 20 years. That's the facts. The current teenagers are more responsible than previous generations. They just tend to get beaten up on because there's fewer of them and they're less likely to vote.
This is Marama Fox. I'm in the Māori Party. I've always felt that we should have left the drinking age at 20. When it came down, I thought that was too young because it opens pathways for younger and younger drinkers. And I think that what we need to be doing is teaching responsible drinking to our young people. Understand that with drinking, there comes rape culture, we have domestic violence, we have drunk driving and all of those things. And if you're going to be a drinker, you're going to drink when you're 18, then there should be some type of training that teaches us how to do it responsibly, because there's definitely have a problem in this country.
Andrew Little, leader of the Labour Party. I'm of the view now that we shouldn't be going back to 20 years as an age to purchase alcohol. There's other ways we can regulate the impact particularly on younger people, and I think we do that through properly regulating access through marketing and through points of sale and through those sorts of initiatives. I think at some point you do have to trust that young people are capable of making sensible judgments, but equally I think we've got to stop those who profit and benefit from it by making sure that they have some good regulations that they've got to stick to.
Matata is today Green Party co-leader. The Parliament went through that in great detail just a few years ago. My view is keep it at 18. That's what I voted for. I don't think there's any argument to reverse that position now.
Peter Dunn, Leader, United Future. I am not in favour of raising the drinking age. I think that we have a stable, workable system at the moment, and I note that under the new sale of liquor legislation passed in 2012, we've seen a 10% reduction in hazardous drinking amongst 18 to 24-year-olds over the last 7 or 8 years, down from 43% to 33%. So I don't think this is a time to upset the apple cart by changing the drinking age.
Yeah, I don't think there's been a strong case made for raising the drinking age. I think it would create all sorts of challenges that we don't know how to deal with.
Bill English ending that ring around by Bridget Burke. Water quality is shaping up as a big election issue. The government has opened the door to more intensive dairy farming through loans to irrigation schemes aimed at making sure it continues. In Canterbury, the government went as far as sacking the regional council in order to fast-track planning rules that enabled the region to convert from sheep to more lucrative dairy farming. But these policies have had consequences for the quality of waterways. By 2015, the proportion of rivers in Canterbury that were safe to swim in fell to 67% from 74% 5 years earlier. As part of RNZ's election year series, Is This the Brighter Future?, Conan Young took the pulse of 2 South Island rivers.
Artist Sam Mann lives with his partner Alison Erickson and their daughter Charlie near the Huranui River in North Canterbury. Last summer, no swimming signs went up here due to cyanobacteria, also known as blue-green algae. Alison says the water quality of local rivers like the Waitohi was already deteriorating when National took power in 2008.
The river had basically disappeared and you'd go for a swim and you'd come up stinking and all the little fish had gone, the cockbullies, and we'd have a pet eel that we'd feed. He had gone, and every corner there was a trout. And that all disappeared several years before 2008, but it certainly hasn't got any better. It's got a lot worse.
She says it's heartbreaking to see these places taken away from them.
I think our whole life was centred around the river. It's almost like, it's a bit of a cliche now, but taking your church away, because we don't go to church, but we would come here and we'd just light a fire like today and have a cup of tea. The kids would play, maybe swim, but that's very sad. That's gone to a large part. To a large extent, we just don't come down anymore. We have to wade through dairy cows to get down to our spots now.
Sam Mann says a rapid increase in dairy farm conversions in Canterbury is clearly behind the degradation of these waterways.
We've got 60,000 cows bleeding into this catchment. That's the equivalent number of bladders to 2 times the population of Christchurch, right? How can this river survive that? We've got 30,000 pigs up the river on the left. We've got everybody brings their stuff to the river to dump into it now, and there's no way this river can survive with more development. Canterbury can't. What's worrying out? Look at Charlie here. I mean, Charlie, when I was her age, my father took me to all the rivers in Canterbury, and we'd go hunting, we'd go camping. Why has she been disenfranchised from that? What right have these people around here to take that away from her? This is her property here, not theirs. So this is why we're angry. This is why we have to keep fighting for this thing.
Hey, Charlie. What's your favourite thing about the river? Why would you like to see this place looked after?
So we can swim it and drink it.
On the other side of the Southern Alps, northeast of Greymouth, fly fisherman Trevor Johns is keen to protect some of the country's best fishing spots from a similar fate to that of Canterbury's waterways. Originally from Sydney, he now makes his living running a backpackers in Reefton and taking tourists on fishing trips. He says fly fishing is a big earner for the tiny west coast town.
40% of my clientele over summer would be fishermen, and although I run a backpackers, fishermen aren't like backpackers, who I appreciate, but fishermen come and they stay for days, if not weeks, and in some cases months. Because to fish an area for sport fish, for trout, it's good to get the local knowledge and to stay in the area and know what you're doing.
And so what is it about this area that makes it so good for trout fishing?
Freestone rivers. At the moment we're standing on, as you can see, a whole lot of freestones. That's the food that trout eat. They live underneath the stones, and because the stones are loose, that makes it possible. The climate is great, the water's terrific, and we like to keep it that way if we can.
But Trevor John says the fishing in the Little Grey, which flows through a series of dairy farms, is not what it used to be.
I remember going out on just about my first day of fishing on it, and whether the conditions were so perfect or I was doing everything right, I caught, as I say to folks, maybe 100 trout in one day. It might have been only 80, it might have been 120, I just lost count. It was such a fantastic day's fishing, and that's why I started coming back to the area every time after that, because the fishing was so great. I haven't had a good day like that since, let me say.
One day, 4 years ago, he spent a day casting on these waters and did not catch a thing. He says it's hard to say why this happened, and notes stocks have since returned, although not to the same level seen 17 years ago.
Everyone from fishermen like me, to keep clean gear, to farmers, to respect what they put in the river, to everybody who uses the river or even comes in contact with it.
This Australian now calls himself a proud West Coaster. He says most people here realise how special their little slice of paradise is and are keen to protect it.
Awesome. What's it like being out there?
Oh, it's great. In fact, sometimes when you're on your own and it's just out there, there's no better life. There's no better thing to be doing.
In Reefton for Checkpoint, ko Conan Young tēnei.
Thank you, Conan. Finally tonight, a Dunedin 12-year-old is claiming bragging rights after beating the Met Service to predict snow levels in Otago today. Now, Ben Hawke, a tidy college student, does his own daily weather forecast on a Facebook page called Dunedin Weather, but by a 12-year-old, which he started back in February. He's doing really well. A short time ago, he told me via the live view from Mosgiel what he loves about the weather.
When I was about 8, I became really interested in science, and it kind of snowballed from there until I developed a real interest in weather and kind of how it works. And I think the first thing that I kind of really looked into and I was just like, hey, this is kind of cool, is tornadoes in the United States.
Yes, they are fascinating, aren't they? We don't get many tornadoes in New Zealand, but we do get extraordinary weather, and you have developed something of a reputation for being able to pick it. How do you do your forecasting?
I kind of go on the Met Service website and look at how the weather maps are doing, like surface pressure and radar and stuff, even though we don't have a radar here in Dunedin. But I kind of just go on there, kind of have a look at what's happening, go onto the rural thing to look at Mosgiel, where I live, to kind of see what they think the temperatures are going to be, and then I kind of think, hey, this is, I don't think this is right, I'm going to say my one, or if I think they're correct, I'll say what they have forecast.
So you use the Met Service...
Like in terms of highs and lows.
So you use the Met Service as a starting point, and then a bit of local knowledge and your own Ben science from there. And how are you going against the Met Service? Are you right more often than they are?
It's kind of, on average, I kind of get just as much right as them, but sometimes I'll get it right and they'll get it wrong, or vice versa.
Ben, I want to talk about occasions when you get it right, and there's been one, I think, in the past 24 hours with your snow predictions, right?
Yeah, yesterday I was one of the first people to actually say, hey, I think snow will be lower than 500 metres, how it's forecast on the Met Service. So that was kind of cool when I saw that they figured out, hey, what we're thinking isn't correct. let's figure this out. Basically, everywhere the forecast was just like, oh, it's going to be down to 500 metres, rain below that. But then I was just like, hey, look at the lows forecast for all of these hill areas. I think it's going to be down to about 200 to 100 metres.
And what did it get down to?
I think it got down to like just below 200 metres. I know it was snowing in Brookville and Halfway Bush earlier today, so I was like the first person to figure this out. So I felt quite proud of myself there.
Yeah, and you have every reason to feel proud of yourself. This is such a boring old person question to ask you, but what do you want to be when you grow up? Obviously, you want to work in science. Do you want to be a meteorologist?
Meteorology would be cool, and maybe being like a weather forecaster on the TV. I'd really enjoy that, but like I really like chemistry, so I might think about a career in that.
Maybe you could do chemistry and do weather forecasting on the TV as well.
That would probably be my dream jobs.
What a delightful young man, Ben Hawke, Taiti College student. His Facebook page is called Dunedin Weather, but by a 12-year-old. He's got 380 followers and he'd love some more. That ends Checkpoint for tonight. Thank you for being with us. We'll be back tomorrow night at 5.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. A Matata resident is angry it's taken 12 years for the local council to decide some properties need to be abandoned because of the flood risk. A fuel company has responded to criticism of the price of petrol by saying its profits are reasonable. The latest ballistic missile fired by North Korea had a longer flight time, implying a significant increase in range. And research shows people are still getting benefits from the early childhood education they received 35 years ago. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Whether they're making their music in Norway